People always ask me what the worst day of a soldier's life looks like. They expect a battlefield. They expect smoke and shouting and someone dragging a friend across the mud. And sometimes it is that. But the worst day I ever saw a man have did not happen in a war. It happened on a clean July morning in the middle of London, in front of a few thousand strangers with phones, and the man it happened to never fired a single shot. His name was Owen Maddox. He was 24 years old, and for about 9 seconds that morning, he was the most disgraced soldier in the country. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, the way it actually happened, not the way the papers told it. Because the papers got it almost completely wrong, and Owen never once tried to correct them. That was the kind of man he was. You'll understand by the end why I can't let it stay buried. Let me set it up for you. It was the second week of July, and London was doing the thing it does maybe 4 days a year, where the sky stays a flat, honest blue from morning to night, and everyone walks around slightly stunned by it. There was a state occasion that day. I won't bore you with the protocol of it, a visiting head of state, a carriage procession, the whole gold and scarlet machine the country wheels out when it wants to be looked at. The point you need to understand is that it was not an ordinary changing of the guard. It was a day when the monarch himself would be present in the open on the palace forecourt in full view for a short window of time. And on days like that, the men standing post are not decoration. They know it. Everyone in the regiment knows it. I was there because my sister had flown in from Canada and she'd never seen any of it, and she'd been on at me for a year. So we got up at 5:30, taken the tube in while it was still cool, and staked out a spot against the railings on the side where the light would be good for her photos. By 8 in the morning, the pavement was already 3 deep. By 9, you couldn't have squeezed a child through. You forget until you're standing in it how loud a crowd like that actually is. Not shouting, just the hum of it. Thousands of small conversations in 40 languages, all running at once, with the shutter clicks underneath and a baby crying somewhere and a busker 2 streets over murdering a song everyone half knew. There were flags. There were those little folding stools the serious tourists bring. There was a man next to me eating a sausage roll at 9 in the morning with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. And I remember thinking, mate, it's a bit early for that. And then later I'd think about that phrase and feel sick. And there, beyond the gold-tipped railings, were the guards. I want to talk about the guards for a second because most people watching them have no idea what they're actually looking at. They see the bearskin cap and the red tunic and they think, costume. They think, statue. They wait for one to blink so they can laugh. They wave hands in front of his face. Kids do it, and that's fine, kids are kids. But grown adults do it too. And I've watched a man in his 50s stand 6 inches from a soldier's nose pulling faces while his wife filmed it. And I've wanted to grab him by the collar and say, do you understand that this person could fold you in half? Do you understand that under that costume is someone who has carried a rifle through places you will only ever see on the news? Owen was one of those men. He'd done a tour before he ever stood a ceremonial post. He'd seen things. The cap and the tunic were the easy part. He used to say, and I only know this because of everything that came after, because of the people I talked to, he used to say that standing still was harder than marching. That holding a position for 2 hours while the whole world tries to make you flinch is its own kind of discipline, and nobody films the discipline. They only film the flinch they're hopping for. So that morning Owen was on post near the gate on the forecourt side in the run-up to the procession. He'd been on his feet a long time already. It was getting hot. Bearskin caps were not designed for a blue sky July. They were designed for a cold parade ground a long time ago, and the men inside them quietly cook. There's a reason you'll sometimes see a guard go down, just drop, straight as a felled tree and get stretchered off. It happens. It's the heat and the locked knees and the standing. It's not weakness. It's biology and the uniform fighting against it. I noticed Owen specifically before any of it happened, and I want to be honest about why. It's because my sister pointed him out. She said that one looks like he's actually somewhere. Look at his eyes, and she was right. The others, and I mean no disrespect, the others had that 1,000-mile stare you train into yourself, the deliberate nothing. Owen had something else. His eyes were moving, tiny movements. Not the stare of a man trying to look like a statue, but the watchfulness of a man who was reading the crowd. Left, right, the rooftops, the gap between the cars across the road, back to the crowd. You wouldn't have caught it if you weren't looking. My sister caught it because she's a nurse and she watches people for a living. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, keen lad. I went back to helping her find the angle. The procession was due at 10. By 22, the energy in the crowd had changed. You could feel it tighten. The police along the route stopped strolling and started standing. A line of mounted officers came through, and the horses' hooves on the road made that lovely hollow sound that you only ever hear in old cities. Somewhere a band started far off, and the tune drifted to us in pieces on the warm air. The man with the sausage roll had finished it and was now holding his phone up over his head, filming nothing, just the empty road in case. And then, and I've replayed this so many times that I no longer trust my own memory of the order of it, so I'm telling you the version I've pieced together from people who were closer. Then there was a sound. It wasn't a bang. That's the first thing everyone gets wrong. When you imagine an explosion, you imagine a single sharp crack like in a film. It wasn't that. It was a low, ugly thump that you felt in your chest before your ears caught up. The kind of sound a heavy door makes if a building falls on it. It came from the direction of the park. From over the trees, north and a little east, towards Hyde Park, maybe half a mile off, maybe less. The ground did something under our feet that I can only describe as a shrug. And then the pigeons went up. I'll never forget the pigeons. Every bird in the area lifted off the buildings at the same instant. A gray sheet of them rising into that perfect blue, wheeling, panicked, hundreds of them. And the sound of all those wings was somehow louder and more frightening than the thump had been. The crowd looked up at the birds because looking up is what people do, and for a second, one whole second, nobody understood. Nobody screamed. We all just stood there with our faces tilted at the sky, watching the pigeons, and I remember a child saying in a clear, high voice, "Mummy, why did the birds?" And then the screaming started. I won't pretend I behaved well. I grabbed my sister and I pulled her down and back against the railings, and I put my body between her and the open road without one conscious thought, the way you'd snatch a kettle off a flame. All around us people were doing the same and worse, running, falling, a pram going over, somebody's stool kicked into the air. There's a thing that happens when a packed crowd panics that the human body is simply not built to survive. And for about 10 seconds I genuinely believed we were going to die there. Not from anything in the park, but from each other, crushed against iron railings by our own neighbors. A woman went down next to me and I hauled her up by the back of her coat, and I don't know who she was and I never will. Now, here is the part that matters. Here is why I'm telling you any of this. While 10,000 people lost their minds at once, while the police were screaming into radios, and the horses were rearing and grown men were trampling over folding chairs to get away, the guards did not move. Not one of them. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds impossible or made up or like the kind of thing people say to make a story better. But I was looking right at them through a gap in the chaos, and I am telling you that the line of soldiers on that forecourt stood exactly as they had been standing while the world they were standing in came apart. Bearskins up, rifles at the correct angle, eyes front. The only thing that had changed about them was that now, suddenly, every single person who had spent the morning trying to make them blink understood. All at once and without anyone having to explain it, what they were actually for. Owen's eyes, I learned later, were no longer moving in tiny movements. They had locked onto something, because Owen, from where he stood, could see what the crowd couldn't. He could see the gate. And he could see, beyond the gate, the part of the forecourt where, in just a few minutes, the most protected man in the country was scheduled to appear in the open air. and he could see the wave of panic from the street beginning to fold back on itself and surge toward the railings, toward the gates, toward the one place it must not be allowed to go. I have spoken since to a man who served alongside Owen. He's the one who explained to me what those 9 seconds were actually like from the inside, and I'm going to give it to you as straight as he gave it to me, because it changes everything you think you saw. He said, people imagine that standing still in a crisis is the easy option, the cowardly option even. They think the brave thing is to run toward the danger. He said it's the opposite. He said that when that thump came over the trees, every instinct Owen had, every reflex burned into him by a previous life in a uniform, in a place where a sound like that meant the next 30 seconds decided whether you lived. Every one of those instincts screamed at him to move. To drop, to take cover, to bring the weapon up, to do something. The training from the war and the training from the parade ground were, in that instant, at war with each other inside one young man's body. One screamed move, the other screamed hold, and the parade ground won because that's what the parade ground is for. That stillness everyone mocks, the stillness the tourists try to break for fun, that is not the absence of fear. It is fear harnessed and pointed in a useful direction. It is a man deciding, against everything his body is shrieking at him, that his job right now is to be the one fixed thing in a moving world. Because if the guards move, the crowd knows. And if the crowd knows the guards are afraid, you don't have a panic anymore. You have a stampede with a target. So Owen held. He held while the screaming peaked. He held while a section of railing 40 feet from him buckled under the press of bodies, and a stanchion came loose with a screech of metal. He held while 2 of his own, further down the line, were nearly overrun by people trying to climb the railings to escape. And even then, even with hands grabbing at the iron right beside them, they held. The discipline of it, when I finally understood it, frightened me more than the explosion had. But here's the cruelty of that morning. Here's the thing about a day that has already decided to be your worst day. It wasn't done with Owen yet. The explosion, the panic, the held line, all of that was just the setup. The thing that would actually break him, the thing the entire country would be talking about by the evening, hadn't happened yet. It was about to. Because in the middle of all that, the surge, the screech of buckling iron, the wall of human noise, a gate that should have held began slowly to give. And the procession, which nobody had thought to stop because nobody at the front of it yet knew what had happened behind them, was still coming. The band was still playing somewhere, that drifting half-tune, absurd now, obscene almost, while the world fell apart. And the schedule, the rigid, sacred, minute-by-minute schedule of a state occasion, was about to deliver the one man everyone was sworn to protect into the open. At the exact moment the crowd's panic reached the gate. Owen could see all of it lining up. He could see the timing of it the way you can see 2 cars about to meet at a junction, and you already know, with a sick certainty, a full second before it happens, that nobody is going to break in time. And he had a rifle in his hands. I keep coming back to that. He had a rifle in his hands, and he was the closest man to the gate, and he was about to have to make a choice that no amount of standing still could get him out of, a choice between 2 things he had sworn on his life never to do. And whichever one he chose, the cameras were going to be on him. Because by now, with the first wave of panic breaking, a strange countercurrent had started. The people who'd got clear, the ones up against buildings and behind the police lines, had turned around, and they had their phones up, dozens of them, then hundreds. All of them pointed at the gate. All of them pointed at Owen Maddox. My sister had stopped screaming. She was gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks I'd find that evening, and she said, very quietly, in a voice I'd never heard her use, "Why is he still standing there? Why is that boy still standing there?" And I didn't have an answer for her. Not then. I had no idea what I was looking at. I thought, like everyone around me thought, that I was watching a young soldier frozen in fear. I thought he didn't know what to do. I thought, God help me, that he was a coward. I have rarely been so wrong about anything in my life. What I was actually watching was the last quiet moment before the worst 9 seconds of Owen Maddox's life. The thump over the trees was the beginning. The held line was the middle. And what happened at that gate, the thing with the rifle, the thing that put his face on every front page in the country with a headline that called him a disgrace, that was still a few breaths away. Let me get my breath and I'll tell you what he did. I left off at the gate, so let me take you back to the gate. Because everything I'm about to tell you happened in less time than it's taking me to say it. 9 seconds. I've timed it against the footage since. 9 seconds, start to finish, and a man's whole reputation lived and died inside them. You have to picture the geometry of it. There's the street jammed with panicking people. There's the line of railings holding them back. There's a gate in that line, a working gate, the kind that opens for vehicles and processions, not a fixed section of fence. And just inside that gate is the forecourt, and the route, and the place where, any moment now, the procession was going to deliver its passengers into the open air. Owen was standing closest to that gate. Of all the men on the line, he was the one nearest the seam in the wall. And the seam was failing. When the panic surged the second time and crowds surge in waves, I learned that day, they don't just push once, they pulse like something breathing. When it surged the second time, the press of bodies hit the gate, and the gate wasn't built for that. It was built to swing, not to hold back the weight of 200 people falling forward at once. I heard it before I understood it. A long, rising metal groan and then a sharp report, like a branch breaking, as one of the hinges sheared. The gate gave about a foot. Just a foot. But a foot is everything when there are people stacked against it, because the ones at the front had nowhere to go, and now there was somewhere to go, and the whole weight of the crowd discovered the gap at the same instant. And there was a child at the front of it. I didn't see the child. I want to be honest about what I saw and what I've been told, because I owe Owen that much. And the truth is I was 40 feet down the railing with my arms full of my sister and a stranger I'd hauled off the ground, and I saw the rifle and the headlines like everyone else did. The child I know about from the man who was standing 5 feet behind Owen. A boy, 7, maybe 8, separated from whoever had him. Pinned at the very front of the crush, right where the gate had given, with the full weight of the crowd about to pour through the gap and over the top of him. Now here's what I need you to understand about a soldier and his rifle. It is not a prop. To a man like Owen, it is the most serious object in the world. There are rules about it that go bone deep, drilled in until they're not rules anymore, they're reflexes, they're almost a religion. You do not let go of your weapon. You do not lay it down. You do not, under any circumstances and on pain of a disgrace that follows you for the rest of your career, allow your weapon to leave your hands while you are on duty and to drop it, to let it fall to the ground in public on parade in front of the monarch himself. There is, in the whole catalog of things a ceremonial soldier can do wrong, almost nothing worse. It is the nightmare. It is the thing they have anxiety dreams about. A dropped rifle on parade is a story that gets told for years. And a rifle is a two-handed object. To hold it correctly is to have both hands occupied, which means a man holding his rifle the way Owen was trained to hold it cannot reach for anything, cannot grab anything, cannot catch a child going down under a collapsing crowd. You can probably see now the shape of the choice that arrived at Owen's feet in the space of half a heartbeat. He could keep the rifle and keep his honor and watch the boy go under, or he could let the rifle go and put both hands into that gap and break every sacred rule he had in the one place, at the one moment, where breaking it would be seen by the most people and forgiven by the fewest. He let the rifle go. The man behind him said it didn't look like a decision. He said there was no flicker, no hesitation, none of the agonizing you'd put in a film. He said 1 second the rifle was up, correct, perfect, and the next second Owen had simply opened his hands and stepped into the gap, and the rifle was falling, and Owen was already gone past the point of being able to take it back. He said it was the fastest thing he'd ever seen a man do. He said it looked less like a man dropping a weapon and more like a man dropping everything. His record, his pride, The whole performance of stillness he'd held for 2 hours, all of it falling at once, clattering down onto the forecourt stone. And the rifle hit the ground. I have to stop on the sound of it, because in all the footage, in every clip that went round the world that night, that's the moment people fixate on. The crowd noise had a brief freak lull right then, one of those random silences that open up in chaos, and the metal of the rifle hitting the stone came through clear and hard and obscene. A crack like a slap. On the videos you can hear a few people near the front gasp, an actual audible gasp, because even the tourists, even people with no idea what they were looking at, understood on some animal level that something had just gone deeply, shockingly wrong. A guard's rifle on the ground. You don't need to know the rules to feel that it's a violation. But by the time the rifle hit the stone, Owen wasn't there to care. He was in the gap, both hands in. The man behind him says Owen got an arm round the boy and hauled him bodily up and back, up and over, swung him clear of the crush like he weighed nothing, and shoved him backward into the only safe space there was, the forecourt side, behind the line, and then turned in the same motion, and put his whole body into the gate. Just him. One man, both arms braced, shoulder down, his back to the crowd and his boots scrabbling on the smooth stone, holding a failing gate against the weight of a panicked street. The man behind him got there a second later and threw his weight in two, and then a third. But for one full second it was just Owen, bareskin gone now, knocked off in the scramble, his face bare and red and straining, looking absolutely nothing like the immaculate statue he'd been 90 seconds earlier. He held the gap until the others reached him. He held the place where the wall had broken. He kept the breach from becoming a breach. And he did all of it with his rifle lying on the ground behind him, in plain sight, in front of the gate, on the stone of the forecourt. At the exact moment the procession arrived. That was the timing. That was the cruelty of it. The doors of the lead carriage were already opening. The party was already stepping down. And so, at the precise instant the most photographed man in the country emerged into the open air, the scene that greeted him, the scene that greeted every camera and every phone and every long lens on the rooftops, was a royal guard, capless, disheveled, out of position, wrestling a gate, with his weapon abandoned on the ground at the monarch's feet. You couldn't have designed a more damning picture if you tried. Nobody filming could see the boy. The boy was already gone, swallowed back into the crowd, reunited within minutes with a sobbing adult, never named, never traced, a child whose life was saved on camera by a man the whole country would spend the next day calling a coward. Nobody filming could see the gate failing because the gate is low and dark, and the human drama on top of it is what the eye goes to. Nobody filming knew about the rules, the reflexes, the impossible two-handed choice. All anybody saw, all the footage showed, was the dropped rifle, the bare head, the broken form. The disgrace, clean and simple and easy to understand. And here is a thing I've thought about a great deal since. We live in a time when everyone is filming and no one is watching. 1,000 phones recorded those 9 seconds, and not one of them recorded what actually happened, because a phone records what a thing looks like, and what it looked like was the opposite of what it was. The cameras told a perfect, vivid, completely false story, and they told it to the entire world before lunch. The monarch was moved indoors within seconds. That's the protocol, and it happened exactly as it should. The protection officers did their job, and the open-air portion of the day ended the moment that thump came over the trees. I won't put words in the king's mouth about any of it. I wasn't close enough to see his face, and I wouldn't pretend to know what was in it. I only know what the footage shows, which is a man being moved quickly out of the open, past a fallen rifle, by people whose entire job is to never let him slow down. Whatever he thought, he was gone in moments, and that was right. But the footage stayed. By midday it was everywhere, and the story that attached itself to the footage was the worst possible story, and it spread with that horrible velocity that bad stories have. The guard who ran. That was one of the early ones, and it's the one that stuck, Even though Owen hadn't run anywhere, he'd run toward the danger, not away from it, but the headline didn't care. The headline just needed a verb. Disgrace at the gate. Soldier drops weapon, flees post as bomb panic grips London. They ran the still frame, and there's always one still frame, isn't there? One frozen instant that gets divorced from the seconds on either side of it and becomes the only truth anyone remembers. They ran the still frame of Owen mid-scramble, capless, mouth open, the rifle a blur on the ground beside him, and they captioned it in a way that made him look like the most frightened man in England. The blast, by the way, I should tell you because you'll be wondering, and because it matters for what came later. The blast was real, but it was not what everyone feared in those first hours. It was bad. People were hurt. But it was not the coordinated horror the panic had imagined. And the worst of the casualties that day came not from the blast itself, but from the crush, from the panic, from people fleeing a danger that was already over and trampling each other in the process. Which is the exact thing, and I cannot stress this enough, the exact thing the guard's stillness and Owen's gait were holding the line against. The thing he sacrificed his rifle and his name to prevent. More people would have died at that gate than died anywhere else that morning if the wall had fully broken. The men who study these things have said as much, quietly since. But on that first afternoon, nobody was saying it. On that first afternoon, there was only the footage, and the footage said, "Coward." I want to tell you about going home that evening, because it's the part I'm least proud of. We got back to my flat shaken and bruised, my sister and I, and we did what everyone did, which was put the news on. And there it was. The thump over the trees was already being called the Hyde Park scare. And in among the coverage, again and again, they ran the clip, the dropped rifle, the bare head. And a man on the news, a commentator with a serious face, said something about standards and discipline, and what it said about the modern army that a guardsman would behave that way in front of the monarch on a day of all days. And this is the part I have to own, I nodded. I nodded. I sat on my own sofa, having been in that crowd, having had my own arms full of strangers I'd grabbed without thinking, and I looked at the one man who'd done the genuinely brave thing while I'd cowered against a railing, and I thought, yeah, bit of a disgrace that. Poor lad's bottled it. My sister didn't nod. My sister, the nurse, the one who'd pointed him out hours earlier and said, "Look at his eyes, he's actually somewhere." My sister sat forward and frowned at the screen and said, "That's not right." I said, "What's not?" And she said, "Watch his hands, not his face. His face is doing what a scared face does, but watch his hands. He's not flailing. Scared people flail. He's grabbing. Look, he's reaching for something. He's not running from something, he's reaching toward it." She made them rewind it on the catch-up 3 times 4. "There's something in front of him," she said. "There's something in that gap he's reaching for. The camera can't see it, but he can. I put money on it." She was a triage nurse. She'd spent 15 years reading the difference between people who are panicking and people who are working. "That man is working," she said. "I don't care what the telly says. That man is working." I told her she was reading too much into a blurry clip. I told her the camera doesn't lie. And she looked at me, I'll never forget the look, and she said, "The camera always lies. The camera only ever shows you the outside of things." I didn't believe her. Not that night. That night I went to bed thinking, as the whole country went to bed thinking, that I had watched a soldier disgrace himself, and that the worst part of an already terrible day had been one young man's failure of nerve in front of his king. It would be 3 days before I learned how wrong we all were. 3 days before the thing came out that turned the whole story inside out, before a single, unlikely person came forward with the one piece of the picture the 1,000 phones had missed, and the headlines that had buried Owen Maddox had to be written all over again. But Owen didn't know that was coming. Owen, that night, was somewhere I can hardly bear to think about. Because here's what I found out later about how his worst day ended, not at the gate, but after. After the adrenaline drained and the protection detail had done its work, and the crowd had finally thinned, and the men were stood down. after someone had handed him back the rifle he dropped, and his cap, and walked him off the forecourt past the long lenses that were still, even then, clicking. He didn't get to explain. There was no moment where he stood up and told his side. That's not how it works, and it's not the kind of man he was anyway. He went where he was sent, and he was quiet, and he waited, and he carried it. He carried the worst headline of his life knowing for a fact in his own body that he'd done the right thing, the only thing, the thing any decent man would hope to have the courage to do, and that the whole world had decided it was the opposite. That's a particular kind of hell, that. To do the bravest thing you'll ever do, and to be called a coward for it, and to have no way to make anyone believe you. He carried it alone for 3 days. And then on the 4th morning, somebody knocked on the right door, and what they were carrying changed everything. Let me tell you who it was. The person who knocked on the right door was not a journalist, and not a lawyer, and not anyone from the regiment. It was a tired-looking man in his 40s who worked in a shop in Reading and had spent his day off, the day of the procession, doing the thing dads do, hoisting his nephew up for a better view because the boy couldn't see over the crowd. He'd filmed the whole morning on his phone, not the guard. He had no interest in the guard. He'd filmed the road, waiting for the carriages, the way the man next to me had filmed an empty street in case. And to get the shot, he'd climbed up onto the stone base of a monument on the far side, a couple of feet higher than everyone else with his nephew on his shoulders, and he'd kept the camera running through the whole thing, through the thump, through the pigeons, through the panic, through all of it, partly because he forgot to stop it, and partly because in the chaos he'd grabbed the boy and just left the phone hanging in his other hand, still recording, pointed roughly forward. He didn't look at the footage for 3 days. Why would he? He'd been there. He knew what had happened, a scare, a panic, a horrible morning. Everyone got home. He had no reason to relive it. It was his wife, scrolling the news on the 4th morning, who saw the famous clip of the disgraced guard for the 100th time and said, almost idly, "Weren't we near there, when it all kicked off?" And he said, "Yeah, about there," and she said, "Did you not have your phone going the whole time?" And something cold went down the back of his neck. Because his angle up on that stone base, 2 feet above the heads off to the side, his angle looked down and across into exactly the place the rooftop cameras and the ground-level phones could not see. The gap, the gate, the space in front of the guard that every other camera in London had been blind to. He found the file. He sat at his kitchen table and he watched it, and he says he watched it about 9 times before he could move, and then he watched it about 9 more times before he woke his wife, and the two of them sat there in the early dark looking at a phone, and his wife started crying, and he says, and I believe him because I've watched it too now, he says, it's the opposite. It's the exact opposite of what they're saying. You can see it. You can see all of it. You can, I've seen it. The whole world has seen it now. His angle catches the boy going down at the front of the crush. It catches the gate lurching open that fatal foot. It catches the wave about to pour through, right over the top of a child who has gone from standing to falling in the space of a breath. And then it catches Owen, not as a blur, clearly. It catches the half-second where Owen sees the boy. You can see his head turn. You can see the exact instant he understands. And it catches his hands opening deliberately, both of them, releasing the rifle on purpose. A choice, not a fumble, not a flinch. A decision made by a man who has just done the maths of an impossible situation in less time than it takes to blink. And then it catches him in the gap, the grab, the haul. The boy lifted clean out of the crush and flung back to safety. And then it catches Owen turning and throwing his whole body into a broken gate, while his rifle lies on the stone behind him, and holding it, alone, until help comes. The dropped rifle is in the frame the entire time. But now you can see what it was. It wasn't the disgrace. It was the price. It was the thing he gave up so he'd have 2 free hands to save a stranger's child. The most damning object in every other video became, in this one, the most honorable because now you could see the cost of putting it down. He posted it that morning, not to a newspaper. He just put it online with about 3 sentences, something like, "I was there, this is from above, I think everyone's got this man wrong, please watch the whole thing before you judge him." It moved slowly at first. The lie had a 4-day head start and the truth always limps out late, but it moved. And then it didn't limp anymore, it ran. By that afternoon, the same footage was on the same news channels that had run the disgrace clip, except now they had to run them side by side, the ground-level lie and the elevated truth, and there is something about seeing those two clips together that I have never quite recovered from. The same 9 seconds, the same man. One angle makes him a coward. The other makes him the bravest person on the street. And the only difference between them is 2 feet of height and a man who happened to be looking in the right direction. The camera always lies, my sister had said. The camera only ever shows you the outside of things. And then the mother came forward. She'd been carried the other way in the crush. That's why she lost the boy. That's why she couldn't get to him. And she hadn't seen the rescue at all. She just suddenly had her son back, shoved into her arms by other panicking strangers, and she'd held him and run and not asked questions because you don't. In a moment like that, you just take your child and go. She had spent 4 days knowing only that her boy had been at the front of the worst of it and had somehow come out. When she saw the footage from above, when she recognized her own son's coat, the small body being lifted clear, she did something very brave in its own quiet way. She let people use her name. She let them put her on the news. She sat in front of a camera, this ordinary woman, and she shook and she said, "That is my son. That man saved my son's life." And then they called him a coward, and I have had to watch it for 4 days and say nothing because I didn't know how to prove it. And now I can. I'm not going to pretend the turn was graceful, because it wasn't. The same velocity that had buried Owen now hauled him up, and there's something a bit grotesque about how fast a crowd can change its mind. How the very same people who typed coward were now typing hero with the same easy certainty, having learned nothing about themselves in between. The headlines flipped overnight. The guard who ran became the guard who saved a child. The commentator with the serious face who talked about standards and discipline came back on and talked, with exactly the same serious face, about courage and sacrifice, and did not, as far as I'm aware, ever say the word sorry. That's how it goes. The machine that breaks a man and the machine that builds him back up is the same machine, and it never apologizes, because apologizing would mean admitting it was the machine all along. But I have to tell you about my own evening, the second one, because it's the only part of this I can actually answer for. I watched the elevated footage on my sofa, in the same spot where 4 nights earlier I'd nodded along to a man calling Owen a disgrace. And my sister sat next to me, and she didn't say "I told you so." She's better than me. She just reached over and held my hand while we watched it, the grab, the haul, the boy flung clear, and I felt something break open in my chest that I'm not too proud to tell you about, because I'd been in that crowd. I'd been 40 feet away. And while one young man was making the bravest choice of his life with both his hands, I'd been pressed against a railing thinking only of getting myself and mine out, which is human, which is forgivable, which is what almost everyone there did. But then I'd gone home and I'd sat in safety and I'd called him a coward. That's the part that isn't forgivable, not the fear in the moment. The judgment after, from the comfort of my own front room, with my own arms still aching from clinging to the railing. My sister had read it right in 30 seconds because she watches people for a living, and she watched his hands instead of his face. The whole country had read it wrong for 4 days because we watched the easy thing, the obvious thing, the thing the camera handed us, and we never once asked what was happening just outside the frame. I needed to understand it properly after that. That's why I went looking. That's how I came to know the man who'd stood 5 feet behind Owen on the line, who agreed to talk to me a long time later over a couple of pints, once it had all died down, and it's from him that I got most of what I've told you, the inside of those 9 seconds, the war between the two kinds of training, the thing about how holding still is harder than running. He's the one who told me the part I keep coming back to. He said the official side of it got sorted out faster than the public side in the end. Quietly, properly. There was an investigation because there's always an investigation when a weapon hits the ground in front of the monarch, and that investigation looked at everything. The elevated footage, the gate, the mother's account, the structural report on the failed hinge. And it reached the only conclusion the evidence allowed, which is that Owen Maddox had not disgraced himself. That in fact, by any honest measure, he'd done the opposite. He'd made, under impossible pressure, the choice that cost him the most and protected the most. His record was set right. The thing that was meant to follow him for the rest of his career, the dropped rifle, the nightmare, the unforgivable thing, got written down in the end as one of the better things a man in that uniform had done in a long time. I asked the obvious question. I asked if there'd been some grand ceremony, some moment, something to balance the public shame with public honor. The man went quiet and turned his glass round a few times and said it wasn't really like that. He said there was a recognition, yes, that the regiment knew exactly what Owen had done and that the people who needed to know knew. He said there was a measure of acknowledgement from the very top of the institution Owen had been protecting, and that it meant a great deal to Owen, and that it was the right kind of acknowledgement, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need 100 cameras to make it real. And he said, and this is the bit I'll keep, he said Owen never wanted the big version anyway. He said, Owen didn't drop that rifle for a clip. He dropped it because there was a kid going under. You don't do that for the camera. You do it for the kid. The camera was the worst part of the whole thing, not the best. I asked him then the question I'd really come to ask. I asked, was it really his worst day? Even after all of it, after he was cleared, after he became the hero of the thing instead of the villain, was it still, for him, the worst day? And the man thought about it for a long time. And he said yes. He said it stayed his worst day, and he didn't think that ever changed, and he didn't think it should. Because being proven right afterwards doesn't reach back into the moment and undo it. For 4 days, a young man who'd done the bravest thing of his life had to carry the whole country calling him a coward, with no way to make anyone believe him, knowing the truth alone in the dark, and you don't get those 4 days back. The vindication is real, but it arrives late, and it can't be sent back in time to the man who needed it. He carried the worst headline of his life knowing it was a lie, and the fact that it was eventually corrected doesn't change that he had to carry it at all. The brave thing cost him. That's what brave things do. If they didn't cost anything, everyone would do them, and there'd be no need for men like Owen on the gate at all. That's the thing people miss, he said. They think the happy ending cancels the bad day out. It doesn't. The bad day still happened. He still lived every minute of it. We just got to find out after that he was right. I went back to the palace once, months later, on an ordinary morning with no procession and no monarch and no crowd to speak of, just a thin scatter of tourists and the guards on their posts in the cold. I don't know if Owen was one of them. You can't tell, really, under the cap. That's almost the point of it. I stood at the railings for a while and I watched them stand there, those still, scarlet figures, doing the thing the whole world thinks is so easy, the standing, the nothing, the statue act. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the stillness is the brave part. Not the absence of feeling, the mastery of it. Every one of those men is a furnace of fear and instinct and aching legs and the desperate human urge to move. And every one of them has decided to be the one fixed thing while the world goes mad around them, so that the rest of us don't have to be brave, because they're being brave for us, and they'll do it whether we ever thank them or not. A family near me were doing the thing, waving hands, pulling faces, trying to make one of them crack, laughing when he didn't. And I wanted to walk over and tell them the whole story about the thump over the trees and the pigeons and the boy at the gate and the rifle on the stone and the 4 days in the dark and the 2 feet of height that was the only difference between a coward and a hero. I wanted to say, you have no idea what you're looking at. None of us ever do. I didn't say it. I just stood there a bit longer and then I went home. But I'll say it to you because that's why I told you all this in the first place. The next time you see one of them still, silent, scarlet, the easy target of every bored tourist on the pavement, I want you to remember that you are only ever seeing the outside of him. The camera shows you the outside of things. The headline shows you the outside of things. And the bravest moment of a man's whole life can look, from the wrong angle, like the worst thing he ever did. Owen Maddox dropped his rifle in front of his king, and the whole world watched, and the whole world got it wrong. He'd do it again tomorrow. That's the part that should stay with you. Not that he was proven right in the end, but that he made the choice in the dark, with his name on the line and no camera that could save him, and he never once wished he'd kept his hands on the gun instead of the child.